Hello, this is Haseeb Awan from Efani Secure Mobile Service, and I'm with Carrie on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Carrie Parker. Today is episode 261 for February 28th, 2022. We've got a really interesting interview for you today. I talked with a gentleman from a company called Efani, and their business is cell phone security. I'll have a little bit more to say about that as we lead into the interview. Now, a couple quick notes before we start. One, some good news, and one, some definitely bad news. First of all, Start Page. We had Kelly Finnerty on the show a little while back. They have interviewed me. Now, this was just a blog interview, so they sent me some questions and I responded in text. But they wanted me to also send them a couple video clips of my responses, which is something they had not done before. So anyway, Start Page has a nice little blog called Privacy in Action, where they interview privacy people. And I was one of them recently. So there's a link in the show notes. You can find the link to that interview there. If you follow me on social media, you probably already saw me post about this last week. Also, at any point, if you want to see any of the interviews or press coverage of me or my book or whatever, there's a press tab on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. You can always go there and look at some historical stuff that's been there too. I haven't been interviewed a lot, but there are a few of them out there. So anyway, if you're interested, you can find them there. Now, obviously, the bad news this week was the bald-faced naked aggression by Russia and invading Ukraine. I don't think that's a political thing to say, or at least it shouldn't be. When one nation, invades another sovereign nation against their will. But, I'm not going to say too much more about it politically than that. And obviously, regardless of maybe where you come down to the politics, you've got to feel for all the people there in Ukraine and all their loved ones, wherever they may be around the globe. We worry about you, and I at least support you. So I hope this comes to a peaceful end soon. But for the rest of us around the globe, kind of looking on in horror and, watching the news all the time and doom scrolling through our social media, there are some things that we need to be thinking about. And because the globe has united to impose some pretty severe sanctions on Russia and Putin in particular and his allies, it's quite possible, not necessarily likely, but it's certainly possible that Putin may decide to respond with retaliatory cyber attacks. So, what does that mean? I wrote a blog article about this. I kind of sent it out off cycle. I usually send my blogs out every Sunday, via the newsletter and post on my website every other Sunday. But given the potential urgency of what was going on, I decided to send it out right away. So if you go to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, I've got a little article there. But basically what I'm saying is now would be a good time to batten down the hatches a little bit, tighten things up a little bit. Don't panic. Absolutely don't panic. I'm not telling you to go out and make a run on the store and clear the shelves of bread and soup and whatever. But, they're, like hurricane season approaching, you might just want to be a little more careful than usual. You might want to top off, your cars with gas sooner rather than later. Think Colonial Pipeline. I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but that's the kind of thing that could happen. There might be a disruption in gas flow or flow of goods and services. I don't know. Again, don't panic. Just be prepared. But I also want to give two particular bits of advice. First of all, this is a key time on social media for the spread of disinformation and misinformation. Do not be a part of that. Before you forward anything, make sure that you've checked the sources, make sure you've checked the facts. I've got some really nice links in my blog article for places you can go to do just that. And honestly, before you even let yourself feel emotion, I mean, these things are meant to trigger you. They're meant to make you angry or scared. And, so practice a little bit of mindfulness here, as you feel those emotions rise in you based on something you see or hear, take a moment to check that and make sure you understand where that's coming from and why that might be, and make sure that you verify things before you let it get to you. There are bots out there certainly that do these sorts of things. If you watch The Social Dilemma, which I highly recommend you do, you'll understand the mechanics of how this can work. And that does account for some of this misinformation, but honestly, what they really try to do is seed this information out to real people and get the real people out there to get, incensed and spread it for them. That's where most of this comes from. So just refuse to be a part of that. All right. And tip number 2, and this is going specifically out to people who might work, maybe in the financial industry, transportation, utilities, energy, food processing, medical, military, some of those kind of industries that would have severe impacts on your fellow man or something to go wrong, you as an employee need to kind of step up your skepticism and your carefulness in the coming weeks and perhaps months. The way that, your industry might be attacked is probably just through regular people that happen to work there. They're trying to find weak links, right? They're going to try to find people that they can social engineer. That term meaning using real humans to target other real humans to get them to be scared or get them to be empathetic. Hey, gosh, I just lost my wallet. I really need to get access to the account. I can't find my password. Would you please give me, just this once? Would you let me, have access to this account? Or, maybe they take over, a mid-level manager's email account and then send out emails to, everybody in their contact list saying, hey, check out this document real quick. There's important policy changes in here that everybody needs to read. Please open this document. And when it says enable macros, please enable macros. And it doesn't matter who it's from. Don't trust anything. If you get a weird attachment out of nowhere that you're not expecting on an email, or you get a text link or something, just think that extra time about, hey, is that real? Maybe I should be careful here. And if you find something suspicious, if you have an IT department, particularly if you have a security department, some sort of an incident response team, just check it by them. Make sure that, hey, is this legit? So anyway, now is the time to be a little more cautious than normal. If you've got security training in your company or security documents and policies, now would be a great time to kind of refresh your mind on what those are. And, I'm sure they've got tips and things that you should be doing on a daily basis that you probably forgot about when you took that training 3 years ago or whatever. So now would be a good time just to kind of batten down the hatches, put the shields up, as we say in Star Trek land. Just be careful. I'm not saying panic. I absolutely am not saying panic. Don't freak out. Just, be prepared. This is a Boy Scout kind of a thing. Anyway, if you want some more advice along those lines, check out my latest blog post. If you're a newsletter subscriber, you would have already received this in your email. So maybe a reason for you to subscribe. All right, now, on to today's interview. We are going to be speaking with a gentleman called Haseeb Awan, and he is from a company called Efani. He is the CEO, and they do cell phone security. And when I say cell phone security, I mean like kick butt, real important people kind of stuff. And because of that, because they, their clientele is basically VIPs, people with a lot to lose in some way, shape, or form, either reputation or money or both. The advice you're going to hear today, the stories you're going to hear today are, they're going to be skewed that way. So take all of this with a little bit of a grain of salt. Realize that a lot of the things that this person has dealt with and the clientele that he has and the situations he is trying to prevent don't really apply to most regular everyday people. That said, there is some interesting information here to glean from this interview for everybody and some just good general advice. So anyway, we talk about a few things here. We mentioned a few acronyms and things that I, as usual, want to kind of give you a quick glossary before we get in there. We throw out 2FA, that is for two-factor authentication. That's when somebody texts you a PIN code you have to enter, or you bring up your authentication app with a PIN code you have to enter. That's two-factor authentication. We talk, of course, about SIMs, subscriber identity modules. Those are those little tiny cards that go into your cell phone that basically tell the phone who you are and associate that phone with your account. Modern phones like iPhones often have what's called an eSIM, electronic SIM, which foregoes the need for actually inserting or removing a physical card and just kind of has a special spot on the phone that programs your identity into it when it happens and can change it on the fly if necessary. But all it comes down to is these things identify your phone to the network and your account. He also mentions an MVNO, which his company runs, by the way. That's a mobile virtual network operator. And basically what those are people that kind of lease lines and cell tower facilities from, names you've heard of, Orange, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, all those kind of companies, to kind of run their own company using those facilities and resources to do so. So I think like Mint Mobile and some of those other kind of off-brands tend to be MVNOs. If not, companies like them certainly are. And he is running his own cell phone network because that way he can control the security of that network a lot better. So that's what an MVNO is. And then finally, he briefly mentions SEO. That's search engine optimization. That is kind of a general term for marketing tools and tricks that try to get you to show up higher in search results. Originally that was kind of a Google thing where you want somebody Googles your stuff and you want your result to come up in the top 10 or, if you're really lucky in the top 1 or 2. And you might do things on your website, add certain terms. There are all sorts of games you can play. People try to game the Google search algorithm constantly, and which is also changing. It's a cat and mouse kind of a game. But this also comes up when people are searching for apps in the App Store and other places where you might search, trying to, find ways to get your app to be, up above your competition. What other term I'm going to throw out? We don't really mention it directly in this show, but I thought you might be interested to know. A lot of the things we're mentioning today fall under the category of what we call open source intelligence, or OSINT, OSINT. And that is, generally beyond the scope of this podcast, but we actually talk about a lot of things around that category a lot. We just don't call it by that name. But we mentioned it enough here, and I've been kind of looking into it myself personally. So I thought it might be an interesting term to throw out in case you ever run across it, and that's what we're talking about. And then finally, I know I speak fast. I know I've gotten that comment from many different places, and I know that I do. As much as I try to slow myself down, I know when I get rolling, I can really speak quickly. Well, I think Haseeb might actually give me a run for my money. So, be prepared potentially to hit the back button a couple times if he and I get going, and you might have to go back and re-listen to something because we both speak pretty quickly, and I think we kind of fed on each other a little bit here. So anyway, we've got a lot to talk about here today, and I don't want to run long if I don't have to, so let's get into the interview with Haseeb Awan. Haseeb Awan built one of the first and largest Bitcoin ATMs called Bitaccess, which has over 8,000 locations in 15 countries. He's also the CEO of Efani Secure Mobile, America's most secure and private cell phone service, which protects people against SIM swaps, eavesdropping, and location tracking. Welcome to the show, Haseeb.
Thank you. Thanks, Kerry, for having me on the show.
So this is going to be really interesting. I've talked about cell phone security kind of in context with just general security, but this is great that we actually get a chance to really focus on it. So I've got a lot of questions for you. I'm sure our audience will appreciate the deep dive. So let's start with the basics. Our cell phones are basically personal supercomputers that are connected to the internet all the time. We carry it with us 24/7. I don't think even George Orwell would have envisioned that we would carry our telescreens with us willingly 24/7. What information can be gleaned about us by our cell phone providers, our cellular providers, like in the U.S., that would be like AT&T and Verizon, or the cell phone makers themselves, perhaps Apple, Google, Samsung?
Kerry, thanks for having me. And I'm a big fan of George Orwell's works and his novel from 1984, where he talks about big boys and big brothers and talking about how cell phones will basically become part of our life, and people will not even realize how it engraved into our lives. I think it's actually true. Like right now, hypothetically, if something goes wrong and we have to run, the only thing we'll pick up is our cell phones.
Yeah.
Not a key, not a wallet, just a cell phone. So I think that cell phone is part of our life, like it's part of our organs, right? When you are missing something in your body, you realize that, and I think if people have a choice between losing, I don't know, maybe like a finger versus a cell phone, they would probably lose a finger,
Right.
So that's how it gets. It's part of our life. Like we go to bed, we go to washroom, we take it. It's basically with everyone. So it's just extension of our body right now. So obviously, when it becomes extension, it's nothing natural. It's something that someone has produced. And when people produce things, they do it for profit. Absolutely, I think anyone who produces a cell phone or operating system has more control over you than anything else in the world right now. So they can feed with any information, right? They can do anything. Like think about if your cell phone drops, you feel like empty. Someone can make you feel that, right? Like that's about it. So yeah, every cell phone provider have a lot of control, not just from us. Like see what Apple did to Facebook. Pretty much the company went down by like 10-20%, I believe, just based on because just Apple decided to do something.
Right. So like when I'm thinking about the cell phone providers themselves, like for instance, I know that AT&T and Verizon or any cell phone provider, by virtue of them having to provide me cell phone service, can pinpoint my location. They know where I am pretty roughly within a cell tower range at any given moment, all the time. So that is one thing that they could easily give up, either maybe under warrant or perhaps even just sell this, which someone been caught doing this. So, but I'm just curious from your perspective, like give us like a little bit of what else are we not thinking about? What else would our cell phone providers be able to cough up about us if they wanted to sell it or if they were served a warrant?
So warrant is obviously a totally different story, right? In that case, any company has to abide by the law of the rule. What works is that when the data ends up in third parties, which use it for doing things that are basically illegal. I'll give you a simple example. Sometimes you notice you change a carrier, so you move from one carrier to another carrier, and your spam calls increase, or your spoof calls increase because the data is being sold. And how it's being sold is that it's a very, very, very efficient industry. Like there's not a lot of margins for the companies to make money on this. So they make money by selling you a cheap service, but then you become the product. And then, Carey says, okay, I will tell you, I'll send a spec. So this data being is sold. They may sell it to one party who then resell it to 100 people. So that's basically what they do. Now, obviously, location tracking is, you're asking about, like, location tracking is pretty accurate, very, very, very accurate. And the worst part is, this is very, very worse, that you can actually go online, buy services which can actually track your location by paying small amount of money. I think it's a cost of like $100 per location checkup. So you can literally find anyone's location just through an online software.
And I'm just curious, anybody could do this, or do you have to like provide some credentials like I'm a private eye or law enforcement, or literally anybody could do this?
Definitions are pretty loose.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way.
Okay. So what about the operating system makers like Apple and, for iOS and Google for Android? They've tried to give us more control over what kind of information we share with the makers of, like, for instance, the apps that we install. They've given us various settings and permissions and things that we can tweak. And as you mentioned, Apple really ticked off companies, Facebook recently or last year by giving people the option to say, you know what, I don't want to be tracked. But how effective really is that? Are those kind of settings at protecting our privacy? And is there maybe more that can or should be done by operating system and device makers to protect our data?
So with Apple specifically, right, they're pretty notorious in keeping everything, a closed loop. So you don't know what's going on in the code. So they say, just trust us. And we believe that everything will be fine, right? Like they have a lot of CVEs, which people don't know. It's about like vulnerabilities where you can't even know if the vulnerability exists or not, because there's no way for you to test it. While in the case of Android, like it's pretty better because you can modify a lot of software. But frankly, how many people can do that? Like 0.1%, maybe less than that.
Right.
So I think they're doing a good job. It's that they're just taking the power. So they're not doing it for you. They're just doing it for themselves. They just want to show off how much power they have, how can they control the narrative. So if you are thinking that Apple is your friend, Apple is not your friend. Google is not your friend. They're just trying to see who can. And actually, I think this will be a good strategy for every company in the future. Like think about Facebook launching their own cell phone hardware. They tried it in the past, but hey, I'll give you a hardware for $200 because they believe the loss for having a lost revenue is much higher. So anyone who controls your operating system is basically in control. And if you go back to cell phone services, your telephone number is your identity. We have been very, very careful about our social security number, giving out a social security number. But our telephone number is technically more like our social security number now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because now that we can easily port our number from service to service, we keep it for life, basically.
Absolutely. And if you lose something, if you lose your CVS, Walmart, or anything happen, they ask you for your telephone number so they can pull up your account.
Right.
So what is this identity? And identity is basically you. So you can get someone's telephone number, go on websites, and you can find their even social security score, credit score and social security number, and where have they lived. So just by telephone number, you can find enough information of someone to be dangerous.
Really? Like with a cell phone number, I can, I guess is maybe going back to the question or the point you made before, but with a person search, I can get that sort of information as a regular individual?
Absolutely. This information is very simple to get. Again, companies like White Pages or not White Pages, but People Search, if you put telephone number, they'll be able to pull up a lot of record on that. And then the other services which will charge you some money, and they give you all the information to run a credit check on someone. So then you can find out how vulnerable a person is. And I think there are a couple of softwares which does that, where they can actually go deeper and find out if this person should be hacked or not.
In order to do a credit search, though, wouldn't I need at least somebody's social security number first?
Social security number are stored online. There's a dark web market for that. So if you give telephone number, you'll get their social security
Oh,
number.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
That's easy.
Not a regular legal way to do this, like whitepages.com or people search, but there are ways you're saying in the dark web to translate somebody's phone number into their social security number, basically.
Again, like it's not like not in dark web, it's like regular web, right? It's just that the definitions are pretty loose.
All right. So let me ask the question a different way. If Apple and Google were to be our friend, if they were to do better things, what more could they be doing as operating system vendors? And Apple's actually in both their cases hardware vendors as well. They both make devices as well. What could they be doing? What settings or options could they be offering us that they're not that would improve our privacy?
The problem with the privacy is and security is too, right? It's like made in America. Everyone wants it, but no one wants to pay for it. So if people say, "Hey, I want to have your secure cell phone service, which costs $10 more," people may not opt for it, and that's the beauty of this unfortunate thing. People will give their DNA for getting a new iPhone. So the problem is that there's not a lot of incentive for building a secure cell phone service, secure mobile device. Like a lot of companies have tried it, but they all failed because people don't want to pay for it. People want to give their data in order to get better search results. So I'll give you a simple example. When you're on Google and you type out something, people want to see the results that they want. On the Facebook, they want to see the ads that they want. So they encourage companies to do that. They say we want privacy, but they don't want. They will be sharing pictures on Instagram and sharing everything on Facebook. Facebook doesn't force you to share anything. So we do share. So if they want to do that, there's not a lot of business case for them to do it. So I don't think they can, but if I was like, if I'm thinking, okay, what can they do? Like decoupling is one thing. Like, you may be able to use Apple operating system on a different hardware, like a Hackintosh, but for cell phones. That would be a good start, where people can buy their own hardware and then can install their own software on top. I think that would be a good start because right now I'm personally a fan of Apple operating system. So, but I don't like their hardware. So, but I don't know any other option. So that's one option. Second option is there could be like two versions where like one is like don't sell my data, and second should be sell my data, and they should have a different price where people who are okay with being sold, they can just opt for it, but there's not another option there. So yeah, that would be good. So second thing is open sourcing their software, right? Like, so we can look into, because we had like NSO hacks and a lot of hacks, and frankly, as a cell phone provider, we don't have visibility into what's going on and how to prevent those. Like iMessage hacks, absolutely, we cannot do anything. Because we have absolutely no zero access to whatever they do. And then Apple is also notorious with, not just Apple, but I think Samsung is also where they have something called Apple package, which a carrier has to abide by. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't know that. So you have to actually make a commit and get through Apple process to ensure that you abide by their rules. So you have to bend over and abide to their rules. And that's why you get like visual voicemail, eSIM card, iMessage, FaceTime. So if you don't pay them up, they will just disable those services and your carrier will be your customer base will get hurt. So what I'm saying is that, unfortunately, carriers do not have an option to negotiate with Apple. So if Apple says tomorrow, AT&T, I'm not offering you a cell phone service tomorrow, you will not be able to carry my devices. I believe stock of AT&T may go down by 20-30%. So Apple actually dictates how you use their devices, how you resell the devices. Like you cannot even buy a device and resell a device without their permission. So you have to pay them every year and make a commit to them so they can allow your clients to use their features like iMessage, FaceTime. So not every carrier have access to that. So if you don't abide to them, they will basically block access to these features and then you lose your customer base. So companies have to abide to whatever Apple says. Apple have the biggest monopoly in this space.
Well, I guess then it comes down to who do you trust, right? Because honestly, I would. It's a tough call, but I would certainly, in this case, I would trust Apple more than I would trust my cell phone provider in terms of having control over some of these things. Because at least Apple's in a position where most of their money is made off of hardware. So I think just from even if you don't believe it from an altruistic standpoint, just from a follow the money standpoint, they're in a whole different space than Google, let's say. And even our cell phone carriers, AT&T, Verizon, and others, even though we're paying them good money, they still turn around and monetize our data. Anyway, so it's a tough call. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Let me ask you a specific question. So this came up recently in another podcast I did, but some of the older cell phone standards, like in particular 2G, really old, going back. In fact, it's,
Yeah.
in the United States, you can't even find it really anymore, or you shouldn't be able
Yeah.
to. It's got really bad security, and yet our devices, even though in most places it's not needed, still support it, because you could, get in some rural area or some
Yeah.
other areas of the world where it's still, more common. So they want to support it for maximum compatibility.
Yeah.
What sort of dangers does connecting to this really poor, secure standard present, and how might we mitigate these risks today? I know that Android recently in Android 12 says they're going to have a kill switch for that, but Apple has yet to do so. Is there anything else that we could do to protect ourselves from this?
Yeah. So actually, carriers can have some bit of flexibility there. They can actually mitigate it. So like AT&T and Verizon of the world, they can actually see that if the connection is through 2G, you can just cancel the connection, not transfer any data. While it kills one side, so carriers can do a lot of stuff on that, and they can introduce this service. The problem with 2G and 3G is that you can actually emulate or simulate environment where your phone will drop down to 2G.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have a signal jammer, which will basically, the signal jammer will force signals to stop, and the carrier will keep on dropping. The cell phone will keep on dropping. And when you get to 2G, you install like a MZ catcher or Stinger device, and you can snooze through all the conversation. That's how this all conversation get tapped and everything, because your calls go through. So a person may not even know that he's on 2G, but yeah, that's how majority of traffic get eavesdropped.
Your device should tell you, right? I mean, have they
Correct.
come up?
It does tell you.
Okay.
Yeah, it does tell you 2G, but like you're on a phone, right? So
Sure.
you are basically the
Unless
phone
you're
in your
looking
hand
at it,
and you're
yeah.
listening. Yeah, and then a lot of people don't notice it, right? Like how many
Right.
people will notice the difference between 5G and 2G?
Right. So when you say that the carriers can block it, if I'm roaming though, I mean, it's really up to my phone to decide what to connect to, right? My carrier at that point, I'm on some other carrier, so I'm on someone else's cell network potentially, or a fake cell network if it's a Stingray. My carrier can't stop my phone from connecting to that, can it?
It can. So we do that too, right? So when we discover we don't even allow 3G. So if something is happening on your phone and we detect that, oh, you're in San Francisco, there's no 3G network there. While you connect to that, you can just block it. Carriers can block it.
Okay. I'm curious. So how does that work? So is there a port? Is it because the radio? A lot of people don't understand that your cell phone actually has at least two computers in it. There's the main one that runs all your apps or whatever, and then there's actually a separate system on a chip usually that handles the radio stuff. You're saying the carrier basically controls the software that runs on that chip?
No, it's about communication, right? Whenever you get a communication, you get like what kind of connection it is. Is it 4G, 5G? Which area is being initiated from? So based on that, you can actually detect, if there's a Stinger device.
Right, but let's say I'm in a foreign country where AT&T doesn't even have cell towers, and all that's available there is 2G. You're saying that even while I'm in a foreign country and the only thing available to me is a 2G signal, that AT&T can somehow prevent me from connecting to a 2G tower in a foreign country?
That's correct.
Oh, I didn't know that was possible. Interesting.
Yeah, that's possible because the way when you connect to a tower, right, you get a lot of information from the tower, how far the tower, what the signal strength and everything. So based on that, you can actually make a decision that either to connect or not connect. And you can make it like, okay, 2G, it may actually genuinely be 2G. I don't know any part of the world where we have 2G still, but you can actually detect if this is a fake tower or not.
All right, so many apps, vendors and web services are asking for, or even requiring, that you give them a valid cell phone number. This is kind of something you alluded to earlier, that everybody, it's a hot topic, or it's a hot ID that people want to get their hands on.
Yeah.
Some of them will claim that they are doing this for security. Like Facebook famously required you to give a phone number for two-factor authentication, and then they turned around and used that for marketing. So when someone asks me for my cell phone number, I try not to give it if at all possible. But in some cases, like, you don't have a choice. Like, you'll go to a restaurant, it's like, well, we don't have those little pagers anymore. If you want me to let you know when your table's ready, I need a phone number. So maybe this kind of blends to my next question. Is there a way, like with email addresses, I can create hundreds of email addresses if I wanted to and give them out as I see fit. But I've got one cell phone number. Short of getting like a whole separate burner phone, is there a way today to get like a second spam number that I can give out in cases like that where I want to, and not give out my main number?
Yeah, we looked into that option, frankly, building our system into our system too, and it was complicated. But for people, general people, they can use like burner apps. Like you can go on App Store or Google Play Store and you can find like a temporary number. You can find something like that. The only problem with those apps is that a lot of those numbers do not work for 2FA. So if a message is sent to that number, it may not work. That's a challenge.
Meaning it doesn't work for text messages at all, or for some reason it only doesn't work for 2FA?
It generally does not work for 2FA, generally.
But it will work for text messages.
It would work. So if someone is texting you like from their phone, it will work.
Huh.
But like a lot of services like Twilio or like, similar type, they may start blocking the number because it's a kind of a technical glitch there.
Huh.
They don't, and companies generally believe that these numbers are fake, so they don't send messages to these numbers because you can know if this is a burner number or not.
And so they don't allow using burner numbers for two-factor authentication, basically, is what you're saying.
That's correct. Yeah. So
okay, I can sort of see that because I guess maybe you could try to get away with. Okay, that's a shame, but okay. So I know a lot of phones now, like Apple iPhones now, actually support dual SIM. So would that be maybe a way that I could get like a second number?
Yeah.
How would that work?
Yeah, you can buy a number from like any cheap service, right? Like, whatever the cheapest plan you can get rid of. And I think there are companies which offer like an unlimited, like a text only plan for like $50 per year or something. You can get it from them and then just use it for SMS and those calls, like Craigslist, and keep it off. I have a number too that I keep it off most of the time. And I only turn on if I have to give my number to someone.
Like, I've never done this before, but I know it's possible. So if I've got, like, I don't know if you know specifically, but let's say I've got an iPhone or an Android phone. How does one phone work for two different numbers? How do you configure and like on a logistical basis? Like, how does that work? I get a phone call coming in. How do I know what number it's going to, or how do I
show it to you? It will show it to you that you can set up a line. Like one could be personal, one could be business line. So whenever someone calls, it'll show up. Is it coming to a business line? It come into a private line. Similarly, when you're texting, it will give you an option, and similarly when you're calling, it will give you an option of. Do you want to call from personal line or business line? So you can set it up in a way that any number who called you on that number, you'll be able to reply to from same number. So you don't have to confuse between both of them.
Okay.
So that's pretty easy. Like it's pretty convenient. It's actually very good. So that's the best option.
What does that cost? You said $50 for a text only. Is this sort of like going down to the corner store or whatever, getting a prepaid SIM kind of a thing, and I can just do this with my phone and just find whatever's cheap?
That's correct. So a lot of companies that you go in store, they will not offer you eSIM. They will offer you regular SIM card because again, it's the thing, right? Like where Apple eSIM is also Apple feature.
That's Apple only.
Yeah, Apple only, right? Like it's basically not every company have access to that.
Okay.
It's carrier plus Apple. So small carriers that you mentioned, which are MVNOs, they normally don't get access to that feature because it's like they don't want eSIM customers to go to them. Basically, this will actually destroy a lot of stores too, where people will just be able to buy online, no shipping, just scan the QR code and they're done. So you can go to a store, you can find online. There are a lot of companies will offer it for like less than $100 per year for a spare number.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look into that for sure. One of the common attack techniques, and this is something that I know that your service particularly addresses, is to clone somebody else's phone. And this is the case where someone else does a SIM swap or somehow manages to make their phone your phone. Tell us a little bit about how that works. Like, how does that happen behind the scenes? What allows them to do that? And then what would that allow a bad guy to do? And then as a follow-up, how worried should like the average person be about that kind of attack? Is this something that's usually a targeted attack? Like the average person on the street this is not going to happen to them, regardless if it is. How would somebody protect themselves against that? What are the easiest things that people can do to try to prevent that from happening?
So first of all, the way it works is like, someone I want to take over your number. I just find out your number through online search, and which is very easy to find. And what happened is the next thing I believe that you are a right target. What I can do is I can actually just look into, there are a lot of services on the dark web which will do it for you. So you pay them like $200, $100, and they will SIM swap your number. And they pretend that, oh, Kerry walked into the store and he showed me his ID while he didn't do anything. But like that's how it works. So the new person have access to that. And what they do is they normally have your email address already. And they just go on Google, do a password reset, Hotmail, go to your bank account. If you have like a exchange account, they'll try to get into your crypto or like your bank account, take away all your money, and then try to get into whatever they can get. This is software that runs,
Right.
and it does everything for you within minutes. And then download all your personal information, Facebook, Twitter, and everything, whatever they can, and then try to blackmail you. So it happens very, very often. Obviously, in my industry, it happens a lot because we deal with VIPs and we reach to important people. So can it happen to a person on the street? Absolutely, it can. It's just that the risk profile is much lower. Like even if it happens, they may not lose a lot of money. And that's what people mostly care about.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
So again, as far as what they do is they need to somehow convince my carrier that they are me, and like maybe they'll say, "Hey, I lost my phone, or I dropped it in the water, or whatever. I need to get a new SIM card." And somehow, they go into do they have to go to a store physically to do this?
No. Normally everything is on the phone, and their website online, which will do it for you. You just pay them.
You're talking about the carrier.
I'm talking about dark web. You go on dark web, you find someone, there are services which offer the service. So if they will say, if you want to SIM swap someone, $200. If you want to get someone call log, it's $500. You want find someone location, $100. So you don't have to people don't have to go through this. Yes, they have to convince the carriers and everything, but it's just cheaper online.
So the people that they're paying to do this, these are the people that are doing probably social engineering to
No, they work in the stores. They're employees.
Nice. Okay.
So they get paid like $8, $9 an hour. So now they're getting paid $200. So they do like 10, 20 per week, and they make $4,000, $5,000.
Oh, geez. Okay. Oh, yeah. I guess that makes sense. Sure. Okay. Well, let's even get seedier now. So there are several companies that market software to track other people's cell phones. Ostensibly, this is usually marketed to parents who want to monitor their kids, either follow their location or see what they're doing on their phones. But obviously, in practice, this could be used for anybody, right? I mean, it could be used as stalkerware, either by abusive significant others or maybe your bitter ex or somebody. So, is there a legitimate market for this? I mean, is this a legitimate thing that people should be able to make and sell as a product, or do you think this should be banned?
If I'm not talking about models here, it's very difficult to define models. I'll give you a simple example. My kid, I want to keep a tab on my kid because I want to make sure that he's okay. Should I know where he is or not? My wife and I can track each other if I'm in trouble. Why not? But obviously, for every part, there's also abuse part that you mentioned. People will abuse this power. Sometimes we are lost and we just share, "Hey, I'm here. Can you just share a location on WhatsApp?" Or you share your map. "Okay, how long will it take me to get to you?" So every tool can have abuses. So I think no person in the world should be tracked without their permission and their consent. Let's put it this way.
Okay. So yeah, I think that probably is the compromise here, is that if these things are allowed to exist, they should require the consent of the person being tracked.
That's correct. And as long as they know, it's fine, right? Like, why not? But again, if you want to keep a track on someone, but then also if you look at controlling like terrorism or controlling, some people who are dangerous, should the government track them or not? It's become a very, very difficult talk on would the government abuse their power? Who should they be tracking? Like, who had the moral authority to do something? So this all become very, very complicated. But I just think that no person should be able to track without their permission.
All right. Well, that leads actually directly into the next question, and that is the next level deeper on this is, yeah, there are companies like the NSO Group or Celebrite who market spyware or hacking tools to intelligence and law enforcement agencies. And, they claim to vet their clients. They only sell to, quote unquote, the good guys. And they supposedly, to some extent, well, actually, I think the way NSO Group works is we will only sell it to people, this Pegasus spyware. We will sell it to you if we vet you and say that you're a good guy. And then if we catch you using this for a purpose that is not what we said you would be allowed to use it for, like you're not supposed to use it on journalists and dissidents, you're supposed to use it against, suspect terrorists and whatever, then we reserve the right to revoke your license and take our software away from you. But this isn't a government. This isn't a CIA or NSA. This is a private company creating really powerful spying software and then selling it to whoever wants to pay the money for this. And they have NSO Group is in the news a lot lately because they have been caught, despite all of their protestations. Basically, they've gotten caught selling it to not so good guys and using it to track not so bad people. So, to your point a minute ago, I mean, none of that software from a private company would obviously be notifying the person that they're being tracked. So this would be completely unaware, and yet it's not a government doing it; it's a private company doing it. So, how do you feel about that? Should that be allowed?
But certainly, I believe we basically are totally against NSO groups and Celebrate, which are the two brand names, but there are hundreds of groups like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very easy to set up these groups and everything. Because you don't know who's being NSO, so NSO and Celebrate may be the same person. There may be like a lot of like gazillion kind of shell corporations behind each other. They are under operating. That's where the first question of Apple comes, where Apple does not tell you if someone is being tracked. So they do their own security, but independently, you cannot confirm if their security is good, as they say. They don't open their software to anyone. There's no third-party audit, so you have to believe them. So it's actually, and again, some countries freedom fighter is another country terrorist. Definitions of like, what's right and what's wrong changes from group to group. When two soldiers go on the war, both are fighting for the right cause. They believe they're fighting for the right cause. So what if, like USA is basically spying on their allies, or like allies are spying on us? So it all depends. It's very, very complicated. And I think this should be illegal, period. But then the question is that, how do you track terrorists? If there's actually a terrorism attack, how do you track them? So this, again, becomes very, very, very tricky, but ultimately this should be illegal.
Well, it is. It is tricky. And I do understand the need for intelligence agencies and law enforcement to do that sort of spying. But I think where things get really, I think where we cross the line is mass surveillance versus targeted surveillance. And when, in the old days, if a spy agency or a law enforcement agency had somebody that they suspected, had good reason to suspect somebody was doing no good, then they could pull out all the stops. They could put people on it. They could follow them. They could do stakeouts. They could actually have spies do things to their phones. Whereas when it's just some third party company that says, yeah, I can click a button and do anybody on the planet. In fact, I could do 1 million people on the planet. I think that's where things break down. And I think it used to be, targeted warrant based surveillance is one thing, and I think it needs to be allowed for obvious reasons. It's when it becomes something that anybody can do for $100 or indiscriminately. I think is where maybe things go off the rails. I don't know. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with you. Right. Again, this is all because mass surveillance versus like individual surveillance, because we have people who have been targeted by the government for their own personal vendetta or something.
Right. Yeah.
Like even in US, we have like a lot of bipolarism in terms of polarity between both parties, right? Like we have one party accusing other one of terrorism and domestic terror and all those kind of things. So is it like, Democrats will say, oh, I wanna track Republicans because they're not in power. Republicans can do the same for Democrats. So it becomes a very tricky stroke. Ultimately, it should not be allowed. And you're right, like subpoenas and all those things are okay. But now it's like, they have a term called legal interception, which means that they can actually get into anything that any party in the US has to do. And the problem is that if you get a subpoena, you can't even inform the person that you're being subpoenaed. So it's become very, very tricky. And again, these are the boundaries that I believe that we just have to adhere to the law, whatever the law is. And I may have reservation against the law, like I can argue the law is right or wrong, but every government should adhere to the law and they should not use their power. They should not abuse their powers.
Well, you're right. And there's a lot of weird nuances to this, and it is a tricky subject. But I mean, I think another thing that we need to, I really wish what we would be doing with our law enforcement and intelligence agencies is saying that the default is going to be security, because you can't create a back door that only a good guy can go through. So any privileged access you manage to get for yourself could be abused by someone else. So let's say you think you're the good guy. Let's say you are. Let's just stipulate that, okay, you're a good guy. But if that vulnerability exists, if you have put a backdoor in something, if you have weakened the software, if you have somehow put in a bypass for authentication or something that you can use, then anybody else can use that too, including the quote unquote bad guys. So I kind of wish that what we would do by default is, instead of like hoarding 0 days and hoarding these vulnerabilities to use against others, when that means that someone else could use it against us, that the default is we try to be as secure as possible. And then in those cases where somebody is, we believe strongly that someone is doing something bad or about to do something bad, then we pull out all the stops and we put, and we do what we used to do before we had cell phones, and we use human intelligence.
I think that's correct, right? Like ultimately, every agency wants the maximum power, right? No agency will say, "I want to give on the power." They would say, "Okay, why we are not allowed to use the same tool that terrorists have?" And what I agree with you is that there's actually a bigger market for 0 days vulnerabilities, and the problem with that is because people are willing to pay more for these things. And I'll cover on the second part, which is how to protect yourself, which will come afterwards. But again, we don't have to argue that it should be illegal, and strict measures should be taken before spying on someone. There's no two opinions on that. The only challenge is that these things are so lucrative that like Saudi Arabia basically abuse their power. Mm-hmm. Israel abuse their power. America does abuse their power too. And every country in the world, every person on the top abuses their power. And they believe this is even this COVID monitoring and everything, I believe government have went far ahead of what their mandate was. Hmm. And here in Canada, I think they said they tracked 90%, 95% of the people, cell phones, and no one knew about that.
Wait, who's they?
By government. The government was tracking 95% of the Canadians.
Tracking in what way?
Location. For the last 3-6 months. I think there was a report on that where Canadian government is tracking, since COVID, I think they're tracking every Canadian location.
Under the auspices of, we want to see where the pandemic is spreading.
That's correct. So now, do you think the government will basically give up on that?
Right.
Right? Now this is illegal, right? No one knew about it. And then I think it's 90% of the Canadians are being tracked.
Again, let me step back from the brink a little bit. These are the things we're talking about here at this level are very rare. This is not something other than the mass surveillance maybe you just referred to in terms of, that is certainly a problem. But in terms of this really highly targeted Celebrite NSO group stuff, that tends to be very rare. But nevertheless, when we're talking about any of this stalkerware, I mean, again, we talked about the nanny stuff where I'm tracking my kids, or I could also track my ex-wife. If I'm worried about this in any way, if I have reason to believe that somebody might be trying to install or has installed stalkerware of some sort of spyware on my device, first of all, is there any definitive way for me to tell if that's the case? And second, whether or not that's the case, is there something I could do to cleanse it? Like, let's say I can't prove that it's there, but I can do something that would make that it would definitely get rid of it if it is there. What kind of things might I do if I'm at all worried about this scenario?
So there's another thing called AirTag too, right? People are now putting AirTags in people backpacks and cars, and now they're able to track them, right? How do you it's almost like it doesn't even can't even notice if the AirTag tag under your car,
right?
Super simple to do, totally legal. So anyways, so there are two ways, right? One is on the hardware side, or second on the network side.
Okay.
So on the hardware side, you can, if you have a phone, you can basically just format it completely. That's the easiest way to do it.
And how does one do that? How does somebody reformat their phone?
So there's settings when you go iPhone, there's an option to do a complete reset.
Okay, like you're getting ready to sell it. You're talking about that kind of
reset. That's right. Yeah. That's what you have to do, and that basically cleans up a lot of things.
A lot of things. You didn't say everything.
No, because there's something that basically can get tracked. Now there's an option where there's a software where even you turn off your phone, it doesn't turn it off. So it will show that phone has been turned off, but it's not turned off.
That's the one. If I think there's someone who's come up with a thing that has a fake power off screen. So it looks like a power off screen. You look like but it's intercepted the actual power off signal, so your phone is not actually off.
And not just it's off, it also transmits data and also transmits your picture and audio calls. Everything is being transferred at that time.
Right. So that's another spyware variant. But you're saying that a full phone reset will handle getting rid of a lot of that sort of spyware.
Correct. Most of them, yeah.
In fact, I think a lot of the, in fact, even some of the NSO stuff, I think a lot of the hacks, the zero click hacks, or even some of the one click hacks that they came up with were only resident in memory. Like if you just powered your phone down and powered back up, a lot of times that spyware was flushed. Correct?
That's correct, right? And also there's something called network reset, which is pretty clean thing to do. You can do it as much as possible. It doesn't do anything to your phone. Just do a network reset that cleans up a lot of your Wi-Fi and other settings too. But yeah, doing this is much easier. Like, if you can format if you have the luxury and you can do that once a year or every 6 months, that's the best part. And don't buy hardware devices used. Like just buy them brand new from a store, and that's about it. And then third party, like, if you trust it, if you don't trust anyone, don't get their phone. So if someone gives you a phone, don't get it.
Right. So what about detecting? So we've talked about trying to cleanse it if we think that there is something there. Is there a way to detect it, or is it the safest? Okay, how would you do that?
So there are a couple of companies which basically can do it for you. They have an app that you can install, and they'll tell you if this is your phone. The problem is those apps are super expensive.
How expensive are we talking?
Like $2,000 per year.
It's a subscription.
Per subscription, yeah. So they will track your thing, $2,000. I know of an app that every time you connect your phone, you have to, because we deal with a lot of like high profile people. So they have an app where whenever you charge, it just basically tells you if your phone has been compromised or not, or what data has left the phone without your permission. Because you have to understand that there are adapters which can actually connect to your phone and basically act like they have a memory card, and they can actually take a lot of data from your phone. So you may go to a friend's house and he may give you an adapter, but it's actually a tracking device that extracts data from your phone.
Yeah.
So that happens too. So there are cables which actually do that as well.
Yeah,
so it's very difficult, but other ways, like, just keep your own iPhone charger or Android charger with yourself. So don't use anyone else's charger.
Right. Yeah. In fact, one of the things I like to recommend every year in my little, stocking stuffer guide is to get those little, I like to call them USB condoms, is what they used to call them back in the day. Now they've got better names, data blockers or something like that, where it's charge only and it doesn't allow data to flow. So
Yeah. And then because the people want that, right? Like, it's convenient. They just want data as well as just other data and charging the same cable. And also, like, used to say, like, hardware keys, such a small thing to use, but I think probably 0.1% of people use.
Hardware keys, you're talking like a YubiKey.
Yeah, YubiKey, hardware key. Yeah. And also, like, if they can't even afford like a $35 key, they can at least use an app which is free, like Authenticator or Authy or like the Google Authenticator, or there are gazillion apps like that.
Right. So in this case, we're talking about this is more about account access, where you're using is your multi-factor authentication options.
Yeah.
Right. So not so much the spyware on your phone.
No, because it's like there are like spyware every day. It all depends on, you have to keep your risk profile low. And obviously we do a lot of stuff that average consumers cannot do because it's expensive and other thing, but that's what they can do. Like, simple steps. Try to format your phone every time. Don't buy like a random phone from something. That's what they can do at least.
Well, this is something I'm sure you must have dealt with. This has always troubled me. So if I travel, and I'm a person who loves to travel, or this could happen without traveling. It could just be a police officer. If I get pulled over, or if I'm going through a border and a border agent asks me to give them my device, could be my phone, could be my laptop, could be my iPad. I'm not going to ask you the legal questions because I know you're not a lawyer, but they can, let's say if they take your phone and then take it into a back room and then they bring it back to you, there are things they could have done to that phone in the back room. Yeah. So you've got high profile people. What do you tell them to do with their devices when they travel, for example, or if they get pulled over by a cop and or need to surrender their device? Is there anything what advice do you give them in situations like that?
Well, I just say follow the law. That's all. And I don't know what the law is in every jurisdiction. I live in US. I can what are the laws for transferring data, but just follow the law. Your cell phone is not secure, right? So if you have anything on the phone, be prepared that will be exposed to someone, either to government agency or to a criminal today or tomorrow.
So the advice is, if you've got something that secret, don't keep it on your devices.
That's correct.
Okay, that makes it rather difficult today, especially.
But I said, like, follow the law. That's all I can say.
Well, for example, one of the things I think LastPass may have this. Maybe it's 1Password. They've got a travel mode where you can say I'm going to travel mode, and what that will do is that will you like categorize your passwords, and you can say these are the ones I want with me when I travel, and the rest of them I don't. So like when you go into travel mode, like it removes a lot of data from your device while you're traveling, so that if it does come into the wrong hands, it's limited to what they can get. And when you come back, you come out of travel mode, and then it refreshes and fills that data, your vault, back in with the rest of the stuff. For example, do you know of any other sort of kind of tips and tricks like that you might do or limit? Like there's another thing with your phone where I think on an iPhone, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think if you hit your power button 5 times fast, it goes into a mode that requires a PIN code. Because some people believe, and the law hasn't quite come down on this, it's certainly not everywhere, but some in the U.S., they kind of seem to be leaning toward compelling you to give me a passcode is not, I can't compel you to give me a passcode, but I can compel you to put your fingerprint on it or to open it with your Face ID, so that if you hit the button 5 times fast, that disables the biometric, forcing the PIN code, which should mean that you don't have to give that up, for example. So I'm just rattling off some things that off the top of my head that I thought about in situations like this. Are there any other tips and tricks along these lines that you might be able to provide?
I would just say that, hey guys, like follow the law. Again, that's my simple tip and trick. Frankly, if someone has to make a case against you, they'll make a case against you regardless. And cell phone is not secure. So these are all the things I can do. Other than that, I don't know anything.
Okay. In your experience, which of the devices out there today are more secure? In particular, iPhone versus Android. But then, if you want to go a little further, if you want to do something third party, like Lineage OS or Graphene OS, for those with Android devices, or there's whole other devices like Purism has a Librem 5, and there's a Pine phone. I think you actually may have referenced these earlier in the show, but not by name. What between the regular two, iPhone and Android, if you're going to pick one, what would you pick? And then if you wanted to kick it up a notch, what would you go with?
So I think that I use iPhone personally.
Okay.
Again, it's not the secure one, but I've done things that make it more secure. And on Android, luckily, if you're Android, you have a lot of options. You can go for like Graphene operating system. You can use Copperhead. You can have multiple devices option, crypto data, 10, 20 manufacturers you can use. You can use. So in Android, you can actually be as secure as you want. You can de-Google your phone, absolutely whatever you can. So average consumer, they just want something off the shelf. So frankly, they're fine with anything they buy. The only thing is don't install funny things on your phone.
What? Like what's a funny thing?
Links. A funny thing is random apps, right? You don't know about the app and you get, click here to make $10,000.
Sure.
Work from home.
That's obviously suspicious.
Yeah, or don't put, you got a USPS package, click here. You want a gift card. Can you download this app or not? These are straight away scams. So you have to just avoid them.
So that actually leads into the next question. So how good are Apple and Google at vetting the apps that make? Because that's part of what they're doing for us, right? I mean, with Google particularly, you've got third-party app stores, but Google's telling you, hey, but if you use Google Play, we have vetted these apps and we have made sure that they're not these scam apps that you're talking about. But obviously, some do slip through the cracks. So what's your take on how well Apple and Google vet the apps that are in their official stores? And then what does happen if some rogue app does slip through the cracks? What happens then?
Nothing happens, right? They will apologize probably, similar to a cell phone carrier. If your cell phone get compromised, they'll say, I'm sorry for the inconvenience cost, even though you lost everything you had in your life. But we are sorry, and we apologize for any inconvenience cost. So that's what happened with Apple too. They do get slipped through the cracks, and a very easy way to do it. And cryptocurrency specifically has been very, very target of where people have lost their entire life savings because they get tricked into a new app that wasn't an actual app. So you may type XYZ app wallet and it turned out to be a copy of XYZ wallet because they did better SEO. So yeah, they do. They get, I think people have laid class action suit against them too, because not just that, but they're running ads which they're profiting from that ads, and people are basically falling for those apps. So Google and Play and Apple Store specifically says that we're not responsible for anything. So anything you download, I recommend that you should go to website first, and then from website you go to the link and look at the reviews. Is this the right app? Because one of the tricks that people use is that they will buy like an old app which no one is using and then rename the name, rename it. And so you go and you say, oh, this app has like 2,000 reviews, so this is the right one, but it's not the right one. And they do better SEO. So it appears on top of the result or run ads, and that's how they get to you.
In your experience, how often does that actually happen? How much of those scam apps get through the Apple and Google vetting process versus through third-party stores, particularly on Android? Is it really that common? How good is their vetting?
But it's pretty good, right? I'm not saying it's like bad. It's pretty good. But like, things slip through the crack. Like it's basically, I'm more concerned about the impact of that rather than like, how often. So I don't have a statistics around like, 20 million apps were vetted and one app went through. But what I care about is one app went through and someone lost their entire life saving. So I don't have the data. And I don't think Apple actually makes it publicly that how many people have claimed, how many apps have they turned down. But certainly a fair number of my friends who run wallet companies or in crypto, they do complain that the fake apps exist and people fall for them.
Okay, circling back real quick to the last question, you kind of mentioned offhand that you have an iPhone and you've protected your iPhone. And so what have you done personally? What have you done to your iPhone to protect it?
So I don't know, download a lot of apps on the phone. I have specifically trusted apps. That's one thing I do. I do look into a lot of, traffic. So like data that leaves. So you have data app that tracks where the data leaves. So I know if there's any funny app happening. I reset my phone from time to time. And I have some apps which are super expensive, and they do tell me if some funny business is going on. And then I don't use random cables and everything. So these are all the things I do. And then obviously I use my own cell phone service, which is obviously secure. So that's that's another benefit to that. So a combination of all those makes me sleep better at night.
All right. Well, after this, we all have a little trouble sleeping at night. All right. So last question before we go, and that is, what parting advice do you have for people? Any other tips and tricks you might recommend? And then maybe tell us a little bit about what your service exactly offers.
Sure. So the tricks are pretty simple, right? I told you about like keep phone and whatever you believe should not believe, don't keep on your phone, because SMS are much riskier. So if you send SMS, it's very easy to intercept SMS as of today too. Otherwise, don't give out your telephone number to random people. For security part, you should basically get a post box address. So every email goes there. Don't start putting your address randomly everywhere. Other than that, use like two-factor authentication on everything, and not just like SMS based, but mostly using like an app based or hardware keys possible. And that should be everywhere. And frankly, these things do not even cost money.
Right. Okay. And then what does your company offer that the audience might be interested in hearing about?
So we don't offer services to general clients normally. We actually, as I said, VIP clients, we call them, important people in terms of they have some data to protect. So we offer a cell phone plan, like think about Verizon, but secure. Our pitch is like you will never get SIM swapped, which is, that's our guarantee. If something goes wrong, we have an insurance to cover you up. But more than that, what we also have is that we actually have a SIM swap protection, and we don't sell you data. So we don't make money by selling you out. As when you sign a contract with any carriers, it includes that they will sell you out. And that's how they make money. We don't do that. So that's our value proposition. For even like super VIP clients, you have different service, but like that tells you if someone is tracking you, someone is trying to find your location, DDoS attacks and all kind of security protection. But again, that's invite only, so we can't offer it to public.
I see. Okay. Well, Haseeb, this was very eye-opening and a little depressing, but good to talk about because it's, it's good that we understand at least what some of the possible problems could be. And thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about it.
Thanks, Kerry, for having me on the show. Again, these things are like, these are realities, right? Like we can't just say that, these things will not exist, right? Like regardless if you close your eyes or not, these things exist. So better to be aware and take care of it.
Thanks again to Haseeb for coming on the show. Again, everybody, just keep in mind that a lot of what we're talking about here today is for a different type of clientele than you're probably my average listener. But I still thought it was really interesting to hear. And so anyway, he mentioned a couple of things I want to circle back on. He talked about a burner app. There are some interesting ways to get yourself a second or third or fourth phone number, because your phone number today really is a crucial identifier for a lot of people, and a lot of companies are trying to snap that up. It's almost better than a social security number in some ways. People don't change their number anymore. You can port that number to any carrier you go to these days. So a lot of people keep their number for life because they don't want to tell everybody they got a new phone number. Unfortunately, what that means is that number now is directly associated with you and can be used to identify you in a lot of different weird ways. So there are situations where it might be nice to have a throwaway phone number. So anyway, there is an app called Burner that you might look into. I may cover this in like a bonus content from my patrons or something. This is not something that we talk about a lot. Maybe I'll do something about an article about it or something. But there are ways, and they're not fun, but there are ways to get yourself a second phone number that can be useful in situations like this. He also mentioned not using unknown phone chargers and phone cables. That is true. That is a thing. I've mentioned that before here on the show. I talk about this in my best and worst gift guides a lot of times, because sometimes it's a nice little stocking stuffer to get somebody a data blocker cable or a data blocker nugget, so that when they're just charging their phones, they don't need data, they just want power. You could do so safely on public USB ports. The other thing I mentioned, travel mode, and that is a thing, and I looked it up. It was in 1Password has that feature. I wasn't sure when I said it during the interview which service had it, but it's 1Password that has that feature. And basically, if you go into travel mode and with 1Password, you can designate certain bits of information that you want to be removed from your mobile device while traveling. It'll stay in the cloud, I guess. It'll stay accessible somehow so that when you come back and turn it off, all that information gets put back. But if for some reason you don't want your phone to get lost with this information on it, or you worry about going through a border station where the border patrol or in the forward country somehow maybe the law enforcement there might confiscate your device and try to take the information off that device. Maybe you want to have certain stuff just not there. Just don't make it available. And one more thing that everybody can do and honestly should do. SIM swapping is a thing. You're not likely to get targeted personally. It's a very personalized, targeted attack. Someone's got to come after you in particular. So for that reason, it doesn't happen often. It's not really a mass security issue. But if for any reason, if you're trading in crypto, if you've got access to a lot of money somehow, or if you're in any way famous, maybe, you might be a target. But regardless, this is simple to do and everybody should do it. Contact your mobile provider and make sure you've set up a PIN code for your account or whatever security measure they offer to prevent anybody from making changes to your account, adding lines, deleting lines, getting a new phone, getting a new SIM card. Any of those kind of things can be blocked with an extra layer of security. They all do it a little bit differently, but it comes down to some sort of a PIN code or something, or passphrase. So talk to your cell phone provider and make sure that you've got that set up. It's easy to do. It's free. There's no reason not to do it. All right, real quick before we go. The 5th anniversary of the podcast, I've been doing this for 5 years, will be next week. March 7th or 8th, 2017 is when I started all of this. And I'm going to be launching a really fun promotion. It's probably not going to start next week. We'll see if I can pull it together by then. But I will be giving away a bunch of stuff, some books and swag and maybe some challenge coins. So stay tuned for that. I will be giving more information in the coming weeks on that promotion. And I've got some great interviews coming down the pike, and people are actually going to be interviewing me as well. So some more funness. So stay tuned for all the details on that as that happens. That will do it, everybody. Thank you again so much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already, now would be a great time to do so. Also, I would love to get some 5-star reviews on the podcast or the book. I haven't had any of those come up in a while, so it's always good to have fresh ones. If you haven't done so, I would love to get some. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. And until next week, as always, stay safe out there and don't get caught with your garbage day.